Greetings, welcome to the show. This is The Overview, and I'm your host, Brother Mbogo. Today I'm going to continue with the technocracy subject. I talked about technocracy in the last program and what this idea or concept or ideology of technocracy is in terms of governance and how they want to use that form of governance to dominate the world. And so today I'm taking a look at technocracy again, but a particular aspect of that falls under this thing called technocracy, the use of science in food and food production. You know, technocracy is based on the idea of experts and scientists and so forth making policies for government, as these are seen as the people who have the best knowledge and understanding of how to develop the right policies to run governments and run the global structure. So this falls under the idea, or within that idea is the use of scientists and science and scientific ideas and scientific methods, not only in understanding how the world operates, but also in formulating procedures in terms of production of foods and production of all types of technologies in order to have the world be run properly, or the world to run properly basically, or run better. So in terms of this, I'm looking at food and food production today as one aspect of a technocratic order. So basically I'm looking at science and how the scientific input in how food is produced in agriculture, or you might even argue outside of agriculture, because some of these technologies they want to take out of the agricultural fields and into the laboratory. So looking at this document, it's a document drafted or report by the Club of Rome, formulating or looking at this concept of how they want to move society towards a more climate-friendly, so-called climate-friendly food production idea. And various aspects of society, food is one of them, in terms of what they see as cause damage to the climate or the environment that is causing the so-called climate catastrophe. In the last program I talked about how climate has been used as a reason for the world to come together and fight a cause, or join a cause. It's a unifying type of strategy, basically. In order for you to be able to control the world, what you have to do is bring the world together with a common understanding of a particular cause, and this cause they decided would be the climate crisis. Anyway, let me read this. To reduce human labor by exploiting the non-human energy sources in nature, for example, was a goal no one quarreled with, but it led to the present energy crisis. Strengthening of the group, be it the family, community, or nation, by having a large number of children was commendable, but it led to the population. Well, having a large family was technical in the sense that in an agricultural setting, having more hands on deck to grow food and so forth was one of the reasons I had a lot of children. The other reason was disease was an issue which caused children to die early, so they had as many children as possible, so at least some of them would survive. But then let me continue. To reduce human suffering and prolong human life by conquering disease was certainly a noble aim, but it led to the substantial increase in the population. So the improvements in tackling disease and the fact that people now live longer are two of the reasons why the population in the world has increased. Large construction projects such as building roads, dams and canals, agriculture and forestry practices, hunting and breeding of animals, mining and industrial engineering, etc. In other words, the imposition of human design on the natural environment for man's own good was man's way of taming nature, but it led to the environmental crisis. So all the activities of human activities in the world they're claiming has caused the environmental crisis. But you could also argue that it's the use of certain technologies, or the overuse of certain technologies. Yes, you have fossil fuels, for example, but the way humans have developed technologies to vastly use these fossil fuels, for example, petroleum, does there really need to be that many cars on the road? It's the overuse of certain things which has caused the damage to the climate, if there is a climate crisis. Because some scientists are arguing that this climate crisis is a hoax, or it was created just to give a narrative for them to be able to manipulate people in a particular direction. For example, then there's also the argument that the Western world used fossil fuels in particular to help develop their economies. But when the Global South wanted to follow the same method, one of the reasons, the subjects that the Western world came up with is this climate crisis, and the overuse of fossil fuels is something that needs to be pulled back. So basically, the Global South cannot follow the same methods as the Western countries in developing their economies, because that would cause too much damage to the climate and the environment if they follow the same method. So after following a particular method to develop their societies, they're now preventing developing countries from following suit by claiming if they follow that same method, they'll end up damaging the environment. So that's one of the reasons some argue, well, not even some argue, some people are positing that as a narrative as to why the West has jumped on this climate change narrative so much. Also, the climate change narrative is also used to manipulate the world to adopt certain technologies which would allow the West to control agriculture, for example. As you know, large corporations are now patenting many of the organic seeds and so forth across the world. All the plants, basically, they want to patent and have control over. So anybody who wants to grow a particular plant, they have to get a license from these Western corporations. Anyway, let me continue with this. In regards to the climate again, and the foods that I was talking about, this is from the World Economic Forum white paper, Alternative Proteins. This is what they want to move basically away from agriculture in the fields, claiming that the rearing of animals produces too much carbon dioxide, and move food production towards the laboratories. Anyway, the challenge of meeting the protein needs of a mid-century population of 10 billion people. They're saying that the world's population will be around 10 billion by 2050 or 2100, something like that, in an inclusive, sustainable, healthy and nutritious manner is enormous but achievable. What is clear is that this will not happen on our current business as usual trajectory. Significant transformation of the protein system is essential to achieve the SDGs and to meet the Paris climate change targets. So going on, alternative proteins will become a major part of the food system only if people decide to consume them, starting from a common evidence-based and framing alternative proteins using narratives that are both honest and which resonate with people's aspirations, as well as frankly addressing and responding to those that are critical, will be essential if alternative protein products are to be accepted. Basically what they're saying, they have to find ways to get people to fall in line or accept these new technologies. So I'm going to take a look now at some of these new food technologies which they're talking about. First, I'll look at basically, this is Food 2050. The Food 2050 concept is basically a human United Nations concept around changing the way food is produced by 2050. So they have introduced certain technologies, or they're still in the process of producing these technologies and making them widespread in order to supposedly decrease the level of carbon dioxide in the food production processes. So here's some of the innovations, as they call them. So one of them is they have technologies such as plant-based diets, cultured meat, cellular milk, genetically modified crops, which we all know, vertical farming technologies, sustainable seafood, and novel food processing technologies such as 3D and 4D printing of foods, offers gains in ecological sustainability and global food security. When they talk about global food security, they're talking about finding their own ways of producing food. Basically, corporations will control the food supply, so that's their idea of guaranteeing food supply. If it's controlled by corporations, that would argue that if you're depending on the natural environment to grow foods because of particularly climate change issues of access to rain and water supply and so forth, then the food supply is not secure. But if corporations take over the food supply and start producing foods, then it's more guaranteed. So that's the list of the different types of technologies. But the first one of those was plant-based foods. Either they're talking about plant-based meats. Alternatives are saying that it has increased owing to changes in dietary patterns and the drive for environmental conservation. Vegetarians and vegans have been found to substitute animal protein-dense products with a higher consumption of plant protein-dense products such as soy products or legumes. Legumes are beans and things like that. The factors affecting consumers' buying intentions for plant-based meat alternatives has been studied, revealing growing interest in these products. Additionally, plant-based meat alternatives have been regarded as sustainable sources of proteins that can match taste, texture, color, and nutritional profile of specific types of meat. The question is, why do you want a protein source that tastes like meat? If you want to move away from meats, why do you have to have a product that tastes exactly and looks exactly like meat? Why do you want to use plants and vegetables and incorporate in such a way that they look and taste like meat? The true aim in a spiritual sense would be to move away from even the idea of the taste of meat and eat the natural vegetables and plants the way they are. But in terms of, yes, pulling people away from meat to plant-based foods, you can start by introducing things that taste and look like meat and then move away from it slowly. But in the spiritual aspect, that doesn't really do much for the fact that you're still desiring to eat meat. But anyway, that's looking at plant-based foods, or plant-based meats, as they call them. But in terms of meat itself, the other notion is to produce meat itself in the laboratory and supposedly cut out the creation of carbon dioxide that you get in the natural process of rearing cows and so forth in producing meat. Anyway, cultured meat or lab-grown meat is another emerging technology that could revolutionize the food industry in 2050. Cultured meat is produced by culturing animal cells in the laboratory, which eliminates the need for traditional animal farming. This technology has the potential to address the environmental impact of livestock production, reduce animal suffering, and provide a more sustainable and efficient way to produce meat. By 2050, cultured meat could become a mainstream option and offer a viable alternative to conventionally produced meat. Consumer acceptance of cultured meat is influenced by public awareness, perceived naturalness, and food-related risk perceptions. So people have not yet accepted it. In fact, a lot of people probably don't know it exists. But yeah, this meat grown in a laboratory is not natural. It's artificially produced. You're tampering with the cells of the meat itself to somehow be able to reproduce it in a laboratory, culture it in a laboratory, as they call it. And then you want to sell that product as a meat to the average meat consumer. But I don't think, these are new ideas to people. For one, people can see that it's not natural too. But to be able to promote it, you have to mention the fact, or not the fact, the idea that the food production or the meat production that they've been living with for many years, for generations, is somehow damaging the environment. The fact that there are more people on the earth and there's an increase in meat production, that the normal, natural process for acquiring meat to eat is somehow dangerous to the environment. You have to promote that as dangerous or damaging in the long run. So you come up with these narratives of climate change. Anyway, let me continue. Although novel meat replacements, these are plant-based meat replacements, were first off the starting blocks and will continue to be relevant during the transition period, cultured meat will dominate in the long run. That is, meat made in a lab will take over from this plant-based meat in the long run. It will become an alternative that is increasingly acceptable to a broader consumer base. For example, those who like eating meat but are in favor of non-slaughter and resource-efficient products. So those who eat meat should realize, well, they do realize, I think, that slaughter is part of the process, because you get meat from animals, and to eat that meat you have to slaughter the animal. The animal has to die. So you want to separate a natural process and create an artificial process now, where the meat itself is not being reared or grown naturally, it's grown artificially. And you want people to perceive that as a normal procedure. That's what they're hoping. They're hoping that is seen as a normal procedure in the future. Yet at the moment, you can see that it's unnatural. Cultured meat will outgrow novel meat replacements in some time between 2025 and 2040 as the technology and consumer preferences develop. Consumer preferences will develop and change because people have now become convinced that this artificial meat is something that is now okay to eat. That is what they're hoping, that they can convince people over time to adopt this new technology. Anyway, in fact, the disruptive effect of new biotechnology methods will go beyond meat into milk, egg white, gelatin, and fish products. I'll be talking about milk next. So continuing with this cultivate, this is a document from the UK government research. It's a research briefing, basically, from the UK Parliament side. Cultivated meat production could reduce the number of animals slaughtered for food. This could replace antimicrobial use, land use, and emissions of some greenhouse gases, such as methane. The Climate Change Committee has advised that UK meat consumption should reduce to meet net zero targets. Net zero is the reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to a certain level by 2050. So, continuing, UK research groups and cultivated meat companies are globally recognized, and in 2025 the UK became the first European country to sell cultivated meat to pets. So they're selling it to animals as maybe dog or cat food already. But in the future they want to expand it to humans. Technology, production cost and capacity, and lack of infrastructure, public acceptance, and regulations are currently barriers to their widespread commercial availability. So they're basically, the infrastructure to mass produce this type of food is not yet there. And the public acceptance also is not there. But Italy, according to this is from poultryworld.net, that Italy's government has approved a bill banning the use of laboratory-produced food and animal feed, as it claims to safeguard the country's agri-food heritage. So you see some countries are banning it already, even though they'll probably change in the future. As more other countries adopt it or accept it, they may change their policies in the future. Anyway, they're saying that basically laboratory products, in our opinion, do not guarantee quality, well-being, and the protection of our culture, our tradition, said the country's Minister of Agriculture, Francesco Lolli Brigada. So Italy doesn't want anything to do with that type of food production at the moment. And then cellular milk, milk produced in the laboratory. So cellular milk, or lab-grown milk, is an innovative milk production approach that involves cellular agriculture techniques. Cellular agriculture involves fermentation, derived cellular agriculture to produce dairy products. This technology allows the production of dairy products without the use of traditional animal or plant sources. This process involves culturing animal cells, typically from cows, in a laboratory setting to produce milk that is molecularly identical to milk. Identical or the same? Identical means that it's similar. Identical, but it's not the same. Well, it isn't the same, but because it's not produced naturally. So is there a slight difference in taste or what? It offers potential benefits in terms of sustainability, environmental impacts, and product safety. Cellular components such as somatic cells, antimicrobial peptides reduce viable milk pathogens, countering preservation. In addition to cell-based production of animal-based products, cellular dairy agriculture such as milk is being increasingly explored. You know, some of these, they sound, I don't say they sound good, but they're saying that they're more sustainable at the moment, but once they start mass producing these things, you don't know what the new dangers will be. So as new technologies, they sound good. Well, not sound good, they're perceived as acceptable, but the reality is when you start a mass production process, that's when the dangers can be seen. In the initial stages, when it's not really mass produced, you don't really see, but once the scale has been increased, then the dangers and the damages start to show. Anyway, this is GMOs. We all know GMOs, genetically modified crops, have been developed to address the limitations of classical plant breeding approaches such as genetic exchange within the same species and the transfer of undesirable and desired traits. The commercialization of GM crops has brought economic and social benefits. However, biosecurity concerns remain. GM crops offer increased yields, adaptability to abiotic and biotic stresses, and potential solutions to food insecurity and malnutrition. They offer increased yields. That is one of the main arguments for promoting GM crops, but the reality is GM crops, in the first 1 or 2 years, the yield increases, but then it starts to decrease down to the same level or less than using the natural or organic seeds. So that, in a sense, is a deception to say that the yields are actually better when they're not. GM crops have the potential to increase yield, enhance nutritional content, and improve pest and disease resistance. When you take the resistance from a particular pest, if you take it from an animal, the genes of an animal, and you put it in the genetic structure of a plant, that alone is something that doesn't sound natural. Taking something from an animal and infusing it into a plant. Plus the fact that when you artificially infuse something into a plant or to the genetics of a plant or animal, you disorganize the biological structure or balance of that gene. So when the plant grows, its balance of certain other chemicals in that genetic structure also changes when you import another chemical in there. So you now change the balance of a plant. So when people consume that plant, it now affects their health. There has been research done into the effects of eating GMO foods, and they found that it does affect the health of people. They become more susceptible to certain diseases and certain types of illness when consuming GM crops. So anyway, this goes on to say, however, the use of GM crops is controversial, and careful consideration must be given to their potential environmental and health impacts. Over 25 years, GM crop applications are focused on major staple foods, crops, and traits that address agricultural constraints. This is because of the advent of genome editing techniques has revolutionized crop. I don't know, is it crop improvement, crop changes? I don't know if it actually improves the crop. If the crop for human consumption ends up causing health issues with humans, why do you say it's an improvement in the crop? Anyway, this next one, 3D food printing. which is like these 3D printers that can produce physical objects. They even use 3D printing in constructing buildings, these large structures around the buildings, that instead of bricklayers laying bricks, they like lay a foam layer, it's not foam, but some of the substance layers to form buildings and so forth. So 3D printing is building on layers to make a physical object. So they're talking about using that same type of technology to produce food, and rather than something being grown naturally. It sounds a bit strange. 3D food printing is emerging as a versatile technology with wide-ranging applications in the food industry. It offers opportunities for customized food design, personalized nutrition, simplification of the food supply chain, and greater food material diversity. So you're going to concoct new foods, or something that looks like new foods, by 3D printing these foods with the nutrition tailored towards a particular community. It's very strange. This technology has potential applications in various fields, including space exploration, health, and catering. Additionally, 3D food printing can be combined with other innovative technologies, such as the use of unconventional source proteins and microalgae to create novel and sustainable food products. That one is very strange. Vertical farming, I think people will have heard of vertical farming. This is more like indoor farming. It has gained significant attention because of their potential to revolutionize the agricultural industry by providing sustainable and efficient food production methods. Vertical farming involves cultivating plants in stacked systems, utilizing advanced technologies and intensive farming methods to exponentially increase production. So it's indoor farming. I think people have heard of indoor farming, where they're using farming methods where the roots of the plant are suspended in a liquid rather than being placed in the soil. And then the liquid is where you infuse different types of nutrients that the plant can absorb. So man controls the nutrients that goes into the plant, rather than the plant extracting the nutrients that it needs out of the soil. This practice promotes sustainable agricultural practice more than conventional farming methods, often involving heavy irrigation, intensive tillage, and the excessive use of fertilizers and pests. Well, there are organic fertilizers. They are things that naturally decay from animals and humans that can be used as fertilizers. And there are methods such as intercropping, which can help to deal with pests and so forth. There are natural organic ways to deal with pests and the type of problems that you find in farming. So they use these as excuses, these issues of pesticides, pests and whatever, to say it's better to grow things inside in an artificial setting rather than just growing naturally in soil, which is the organic and natural way to grow food. And they want to bring these processes inside, and this is more than likely will be managed by large corporations, so that they have control over the food supply, particularly in Western countries at the moment. But they want to change it in a way that the food that you consume, which is all already in the western part of the world, infested with pesticides and herbicides and so forth, contaminated with such things. So they want to basically, although they're saying that you no longer need those pesticides and herbicides, the fact that they'll be chemically supplying nutrients to the plants through these water, moisture type processes, there'll be greater control over what goes into the plants by humans, and you never know what they could put into the plants, things that could cause harm, things that could control the mindsets of people. There are many negative aspects in terms of when you grow something in a lab and you have a particular control over it, you can infuse what you want into the plant in a way that you couldn't if it was growing in a more natural environment. Anyway, That's to look at some of the technologies that they intend to use or intend to bring in. And some of them are already being used. GMOs have already been used for a number of years. But let's look at the other aspect of this is the pharmaceutical industries are getting in on this use of technology to grow plants and crops. So this is the next section I'm looking. It's a website called Future Agenda. It's a think tank basically, and they have a website which I've extracted a document from, and I'm just looking at certain extracts from the document. So it's talking about pharma foods, and this is the development of foods with pharmaceutical capabilities, because you're now mixing pharmaceutical tablets, whatever you want to call them, or procedures within food. You're infusing pharmaceuticals or medicines within food, basically, although food is a medicine in a sense, but they want to infuse their chemicals into the food in such a way that when people consume it, they'll supposedly get some kind of healing. By 2020, many in the pharmaceuticals and food industries predict biotechnical advances to combine foods grown in the field and drugs developed in the lab. In the next decade, we can expect to see a shift in some of our basics from traditional pharma foods, that is the farmers out in the fields, to more sophisticated pharma foods or pharmaceutical foods. The term nutraceuticals, which comes from a combination of nutrition and pharmaceuticals, is used to describe food or a part of a food that provides medical or health benefits, including the prevention or treatment of a disease. So they're talking about infusing cures or chemicals within foods that can cure certain ailments. Nutraceuticals are a growth sector attracting pharmaceutical and biotech companies, including the likes of Monsanto, DuPont, Abbott, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, and Genzyme Transgenic. Continuing, while these products have been appearing on the market in recent years, the next step now on the horizon is in foods created for medical benefit. The big change is the link between food preparation and nutrigenics, which is applying the sciences of genomics, transcriptions, proteogenomics, proteomics, and metabolomics to human nutrition. Basically, all of these are forms of gene technology. They're tampering with the genetics of a food so that it produces certain chemicals which can be used for healing. So if somebody has an illness, they supposedly no longer need to take certain tablets or whatever. They just consume a particular food which has that medicine within it. Although that sounds farcical, because the reality is that foods have natural healing properties anyway. You have to eat the right foods for that. So many foods, if you eat the right food, can cure many diseases. We know that herbal medicine exists. So why you need to infuse foods with certain chemicals, which means now you're controlling the food and the healing supply of foods, healing capabilities of food, rather than relying on something that is grown organically. Again, tampering genetically with certain foods, you don't know the side effects and the long-term effects that it can have on a human, even if you infuse something that has healing qualities within that food. The imbalance that chemical has caused in the food will cause damage in the long run. Nutrigenics is a relatively new science and is the application of a high throughput genomic tools in nutrition research. Now that human genes have been sequenced and we can understand more about our makeup, nutrigenics is essentially the science that allows us to tailor food to fit our genetic profiles. So they want to tailor food to fit the genetic profiles of individuals or even groups, ethnic groups, races of people. So you can create within the foods or a type of the food that people eat, something with a poison in it. People think that they're eating their natural food or their native foods, but you have created it that when it grows it develops a poison that in the long run can end up causing sterilization in people. People can't produce their population or reproduce their population. It's a form, we could argue that they could use it as a form of population control, which is one of the intentions in reality of some of these groups. They are engineered to provide specific health benefits. For instance, gene farming allows scientists to alter an animal's DNA by combining it with the DNA from another species. As I said, infusing animal DNA into a plant, because that animal has some resistance to a disease, you want that plant to also have resistance to that disease, so you tamper the genetics of the plant and import falsely or artificially a particular resistance. Imbalancing the chemical makeup of the genetics of that plant will cause damage in the long run. The resulting genetic modified animals, transgenic fish, cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens, are tailored to provide embedded drugs and proteins for human consumption. So you tailor something to provide a particular drug if you eat that animal. But once you tamper with it and you infuse that drug into it, you don't know what other problems the animal you'll cause with that animal or with the human that eats the animal. Modified potatoes have been enhanced with protein. Potatoes with protein, another artificial, completely artificial. Potatoes are primarily carbohydrates. So if you infuse them so they have, 20% fat, will you really be still eating a potato, or now you'll be eating something that's completely different, but you're still calling it a potato? In 2008, scientists altered a carrot so that it could produce calcium and become a possible cure for osteoporosis. So you change, basically they want to change plants, because once it has new types of nutrients or chemicals within it, it's no longer the same plant. There has also been discussion of the benefit that can be gained for, they're talking about this golden rice, which Bill Gates has been talking about for a number of years. So certain populations, they say, deficient in vitamin A or beta carotene. So they want to infuse golden rice into their rice, or infuse vitamin A into their rice to make it look yellow. And they expect people to eat this rice instead of encouraging the people to eat more fruits or vegetables that have that beta carotene naturally. They want to infuse it artificially and create this false product they call golden rice. And here, there have been concerns about this by certain corporations, but you have to wonder what their real agenda for their concerns are. Although no products are currently on the market, the U.S. National Academy of Science undertook a study that did not identify any food safety concerns, although corporations are concerned. Back in 2007, several food companies lobbied the U.S. Department of Agriculture against the introduction of farmer foods due to concerns about their negative impacts on food safety, on markets for food crops, and on the integrity of the wider food supply. But these same corporations are growing, some of them are already growing GMO crops, and they're taking it as a norm. Yet they're complaining about this farmer foods, which is also a GM tampered product. So you have to question why they're really questioning. Is it because the pharmaceutical industry wants to start rearing crops or growing crops in the lab? Why they're worried about their bottom line, their profits and so forth. In its 2008 Corporate Social Responsibility Report, they're addressing concerns about the testing of plant-based pharmaceuticals. General Mills is one of the corporations in the US. It controls a lot of the food producers in the US, basically. It stated that to fully ensure the safety of world production via plants and grains, General Mills currently opposes moving to production of any so-called farmer food that would use a food crop or a food grain to grow or produce plant-made pharmaceuticals. I think their main concern is the threat to their bottom line. Because if the pharmaceutical industry gets into the food industry, it will take some of the profits away from food corporations. However, despite this reticence and given the increasingly populous and hungry world, many companies are now progressing with the development of farmer foods. So maybe some of these companies, it seems, are adopting this farmer food idea, while some are not so happy with it. They're worried about their profits, even though they frame it as if they're concerned about food safety, but it's also about their profits. Jim Kirkwood is an expert. He was involved in this General Foods Corporation, but he's perceived, I think, as some kind of expert in the food industry in the US. He's saying basically that farmer foods, the intersection between food and pharmaceuticals, is an area of growing opportunity for many in the food sector as consumers demand more technologically sophisticated foods with unique, complex health benefits. Whether people are really seeking technologically sophisticated foods or foods that have been tampered with, that one somebody can question. I'm sure people would rather natural, something that has grown organically and natural and has health benefits, than something that has been tampered with in a lab. Anyway, continuing. Food companies will need to respond. We now understand more about individuals' disease propensities from the human genome, therefore nutrigenomic determination of diet becomes technically possible. Basically, the ability to understand people's genetic makeup allows them to, plus the technology of gene editing and tampering with genes allows them to infuse certain nutritional and pharmaceutical products into the genetics of an animal or a plant, so it grows with those pharmaceutical capabilities or components within it. And they see this as progress in terms of how agriculture should go, or the directions that agriculture should go. But this idea that you can tamper with nature in order to produce what you want when nature already has those capabilities is strange. I think it's man using his knowledge and scientifically developed skills in order to play with nature and give him the capacity to determine how the food he produces or he eats looks, tastes, and what it can do and so forth, rather than relying on nature and seeking out ways to live with nature and live with the food that we already have and the plants that we already have and use them in the proper way. You want to tamper with them. And there's also the aspect of living a lifestyle, improving the lifestyle that humans live in order to not get these diseases in the first place. Instead, what you do, you have people still consuming, for example, a lot of sugar, getting diabetes, and maybe they want to create plants that can help to fight diabetes in the sense of reduced blood sugar levels. Instead of getting people to consume less sugar-laden products, you probably still have people eating a lot of sugar, but then you'll create plants that have some kind of insulin capacity to reduce people's blood sugar levels. So it's almost a circle of almost confusion, where people are not even confusing. They know exactly what they're doing by providing people with foods that have too much sugar, because that's how they make their profits, these corporations. But at the same time, they want people to consume products to help fight their level of diabetes. So it's a vicious circle where you create the disease and then you give the people products to fight the disease. So anyway, that's a look at the food sector and what's likely to take place technologically under this technocratic system in terms of how our food systems will develop, particularly in Western, I think on the continent of Africa, some of this technology, because I know GMOs have been adopted on the continent, but across the world as well. I think these newer technologies will be accepted more in the West initially, or even in the long term, than it will be in countries that normally live agriculture and their dependence on the food they depend on doesn't come from large corporations, are less likely to accept these new technologies than countries where farming is not a large part of their production base, they're more likely to end up depending on these technologies. So anyway, that is it for today.